So this is the PI Education Monthly webinar. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. This month, we're talking all about origin stories. I shared my origin story last week in the weekly briefing. We've had a series of stories in Pursuit magazine over the past month about origin stories, and I'm pretty excited to share the time today with Steve Morrow from California. Steve is a private investigator, a crazy interesting guy. I do want to take just a second and read a little bit from one of Steve's pieces that he did for Pursuit magazine. I'm reminded that some of the most precious things are formed under pressure. Rosie faced the pain of her history and emerged from it all tough as a diamond and priceless to the people who loved her. She may never know for sure what passed through the mind of the person who abandoned her that night, but after 6 years of asking her family hard questions, studying their faces and seeing their hope, their fear, hope, and denial, she has glimpsed her mother's heart, the shame, terror, and anguish, and after, the bitter remorse. That's a fine bit of writing. It's a descriptive bit of writing, and it's talking about a story that Steve shared in Pursuit magazine about how his wife looked into her origin story, her actual origin story. Steve Morrow, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from, what kind of work you do, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Hal. My name is Steve Morrow. I am from California. I have been doing private investigations since 2003. I started out as a general practitioner and really tried to hone in more on family law and criminal defense type of work. I'm a father of three wonderful kids that keep me on my toes all the time. And I've been blessed to work in this line of work and meet a lot of interesting folks and help them hopefully to come to some closure in some of the things that have happened to them in their lives.
How did you find your way to the PI business, Steve? Since we're talking about origin stories, let's dive right into it. How did you become a private investigator?
So when I was a kid, like I'm pretty sure like a lot of other people, I used to read novels, and one of the characters that I really, really had, fallen in love with, for lack of a better term, was a character by the name of Ezekiel Easy Rawlins. The reason why I came to like him was, for me, being a black person, there weren't too many black PIs in novels that I knew of at the time. Also, he came from a backdrop that I was very familiar with, LA. And so a lot of the places that he would talk about, I had either been to or had heard about. And, just to see him go through the challenges that he went through, and to execute everything, and even though it's fictional, but in a great way, was inspiring to me and had made me want to take a look at this work a little bit closer and to see if it was actually something that could become a reality for me.
How old were you when you thought, gee, that's what I want to do? I'd like to be a private investigator.
My mom would swear I was probably 5. I think that when I was about 12, it became serious for me, and when I was 14, entering into high school, I had done something with the business academy there, and the model of the business that I had went into was actually private investigating. So I think it started becoming more of a reality for me around that time.
Okay, so you started young. Is this your first and only career, being a private investigator?
Um, I Yeah, my first job was far from private investigating. It was flipping burgers. And but slowly, as I started after I got out of high school and stuff, my schooling and everything was more geared towards getting into this line of work. So I didn't go the traditional way in regards to doing law enforcement and all of that. Really, I entered into a trade school that was geared towards private investigation. It was called Nick Harris Detective Academy, and and then after that, I just went ahead, did some, junior college, and then just went ahead and started doing my thing here.
And what kind of work do you primarily do, Steve?
Now I do a lot of family law and criminal defense work. And still get a little bit of domestic stuff that comes through. I try to gear myself more towards working for attorneys and having attorneys being my primary clientele. I'm trying to deviate away from folks that have tinfoil in their windows and their electric outlets and stuff like that.
We've all dealt with the tinfoil hat crowd. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, sir.
I find it interesting. And do you mind to tell me roughly how old you are? You can give me a range if you're not comfortable sharing your
I'm
actual
I'm
age.
I'm in my late 30s. So I've been doing this work. I was 22 when I started.
Okay.
So, I've been doing it. It doesn't feel like a long time, but it's been pretty much my adult life.
That's amazing. So my early influences were much in the same way yours are. They were fictional influences. I grew up watching the Rockford Files with my grandmother. Literally every Friday evening, I'd be at grandmom's house watching the Rockford Files with her. I remember, do you remember the show Quincy M.E.?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
We watched that. I think Klugman was the guy's name, the main character's name. And then, when Magnum PI came out, I was like totally blown away with that character. I was like, and I was a young man, but yeah, I mean, I grew up watching fictional PIs and reading fictional PIs, and kind of had that in my head all along. The difference between you and me, one of the many differences I'm sure, is, I went into a completely different career path altogether. Like I went to university here in Nashville, Tennessee, got a degree in business, and went into the same business my father was in, which was real estate appraisal. And I appraised real estate for 23 years straight. Like literally, that's all I did. And I was talking to a lawyer friend of mine about 13, maybe 14 years ago. And he'd asked me for some help on a case he was working on. And I was able to find some information that nobody else had been able to find. And he said, yeah, you really ought to be a private investigator. And I thought, there's that again. So I looked into what it would take to get a PI license, and I did. I very quietly went through the process of getting a license in Tennessee. And one of the things in Tennessee, you had to be an apprentice with the company or affiliated with the company. So I also started my own PI company at the same time, and was my own sponsor. But I got the license. I got the company license. I didn't tell anybody. I mean, Kim knew because she watched me studying for the test and go through the process, but I didn't tell anybody else. And one of the things I didn't tell in the origin story video from last week was after I got the PI license, I was still a practicing real estate appraiser. My mom and dad came up to visit for a weekend, and we went to the Frothy Monkey, a little coffee house down the way. And we're sitting there having a cup of coffee and eating breakfast. And I said, so Dad, I got some news. He said, what? I said, I've got a new professional license. And he looked up and he didn't even miss a beat. He said, private investigator? And I said, how did you know? He says, I always knew you would. And it had been in my mind all along. And the funny thing is the skill set is the same.
Oh, really?
Oh, totally. I mean, real estate appraisers are outdoors, knocking on doors, going through people's houses, talking to people, getting people to tell them things that people wouldn't normally talk about, like deep personal financial issues. Interviewing people about transactions and stuff that a lot of people, again, don't want to talk about. Locating witnesses, real estate appraisers, finding people to verify sales information is just identifying and locating witnesses. So the skill set for me was like, it's identical. It's the same work.
So it was a good primer for you then.
Oh yeah, totally. And I still teach some appraisal classes, and you want to watch a room full of appraisers, mid-career appraisers who are tired, burned out, bored with their work or whatever, and you tell them that they are exactly like a private investigator. They sit up a little straighter, they feel a little cooler. There's something fun about it. But it's the same job. It's now the consequences are different. Like you do criminal defense work, right?
Yes, sir.
What are the consequences when you're doing criminal defense work?
Well, somebody can either go to jail for a long time, or possibly, depending on the case, can lose their life if you don't get what's needed in order to help show what the other side of the story, the other side of the facts.
Right. And when I worked in a real estate appraisal, the thing that hit me was that the consequences are if this appraisal goes bad, somebody doesn't get a loan from this one bank. So the stakes aren't quite as high in that business, but they're personal and they're important. But when we talk about life and liberty, the work we do as private investigators, I feel it gives me a sense of a feeling of meaning, a feeling that I'm doing something that matters. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, like a purpose out there.
Yeah. And that's not to say for my real estate appraisal friends that the work you do does not matter. It does. People need, it's a required part of the process of buying a home. If you're going to borrow money, you've got to have an appraisal. And it's a very important part of the due diligence process for financial institutions. Tell me, Easy Rawlings is, and I'm sure most of the people in the room today have heard of Easy Rawlings. I don't know how many people in the room have actually read Easy Rawlings. I am a fan of Walter Moles mostly. I read his last book, and I can't remember the character's name. It wasn't Easy Rawlings.
Was it a Leonard McGill?
Yes.
Yeah, more modernized guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that guy. Great character. The storytelling is fun. It's fantastic. But we don't like to admit it as private investigators, but we draw from our intake of fiction, be it television, movies, or books, to inform our actual lives a lot of times. So for you, have you ever found yourself, and the reason I'm asking this is kind of a setup, your article in Pursuit magazine talks about, what would Easy do? So talk to us about some situations where you've run into like, I'm going to draw on my fictional PI's character and do it this way.
Well, in the article that I did do for Pursuit, Chasing Easy, Easy, he does not have a hard time coming up with pretexts and coming up with different names and different personalities in order to fit a role in an effort to get some information. And Easy, when he hits a brick wall, usually he's out there sitting there and trying to figure out another way to get around it or how to get through it. So in the article that I had first done for you all, I talked about trying to locate a person that was involved in the accident that had caused my client severe injury and medical bills that were piling up that she just could not afford. She was in threat of losing her home and all of these other things that, of course, that get attached to that. So all she had was an old address, and I went out to the old address, and it didn't work out at first. So I'm like, okay, what can I do? How can I, the person doesn't live here. I'm like, well, who else could have possibly, what would Easy do? Who else could have possibly lived here when this person lived here? Neighbors, so go and talk to a neighbor. And the neighbor is like, oh yeah, I made it seem like I was there trying to do the guy a favor. I had found his wallet out there on the ground, and I needed to get to him, and this was the only information I had. And the guy, of course, was more than willing to help his neighbor. Hopefully, I'm not telling somebody to do something that they can't do in their state. But at any rate, he ended up giving me the guy's place of employment, which allowed for me to catch up to the guy and get this paperwork that papers needed to be served on the gentleman. Another thing, we talked about Rockford, and I loved Rockford. I didn't grow up, unfortunately, and fortunately, I guess, depending on how you look at it, watching him, but I got to enjoy him later on Netflix. And I'll never forget there was an episode where Rockford was sitting out. His client had hired him to videotape her having a conversation with the guy that was trying to blackmail her. And he's sitting there in the bushes with this handheld camera that had like a stick on it, and he's up there recording and hoping to God that they didn't hear him. And I remember a case where the only way that I could get information was sneaking up and hiding in the bushes. And it took a lot for me to come to terms with, okay, you're going to sit in the bushes. There's going to be spiders. There's going to be all kinds of stuff that are jumping on you. But it's a workers' comp case, and you need to get this in order to help your client out. And that wasn't a what would Easy do moment. That was definitely a what would Rockford do moment.
Yeah, and when it comes to what would Rockford do, a lot of times for private investigators, what Rockford would do is not what we should do.
Absolutely not. Rockford lost a lot of teeth doing the wrong things.
And the same thing with Magnum PIs. Like, what would Magnum do? Not what we should do necessarily. Things we don't do as private investigators. And I want to be clear, we're not, Steve, you're not an attorney, are you?
No, sir.
Okay, neither am I. So we're not attorneys. The suggestions we're making are not legal advice. They're just two dudes who happen to be private investigators offering opinions on things. So there's that. But, when you watch TV detectives, every detective show I've ever seen at some point has the primary character breaking out a lockpick kit or something like that, and working their way into a room by basically breaking and entering. And that is not what we do.
No, not unless you want, have a quick trip to sitting in jail and then having to have your own PI try to help track down some witnesses to try to help you out and explain why you would even come to conclusion of trying to break into somebody's home.
Right. But the funny thing is, I'm trying to say this story in a way that doesn't identify anybody. There's a PI that I'm familiar with in a town that I once lived in at one time, who on his website says that he broke into somebody's apartment and found evidence, and that's how he figured out he was good at being a private investigator, and then got into the business. That's on the website, and that concerns me as a private investigator. I'm like, dude, we can't be doing that.
For me, I personally would never want to highlight or put a spotlight on any crimes that may or may not have ever committed, especially since we have such a bad image sometimes as PIs. Sometimes we get this image, we do those things that this guy is purported to doing. I can't tell you how many times I've had people call me and have asked me to do things that are outright illegal, because they've watched TV and they think that, oh, well, I saw it on NCIS Los Angeles. Why can't you hack into all these computers and get my, husband's financial information? So it's really unfortunate that somebody is out there putting that image of us still out there, because it's hard to try to be a professional and try to present that image when you do have people out there that do those things.
Yeah, and as far as fictional PIs go, there is a huge amount of stories, or a number of stories out there where the PI does something illegal to win the case. And at the end of the day, what we do is, professional private investigators are probably more above board than a lot of other people that do investigative work, because everything we do is subject to scrutiny. So there's that. The perception issue is difficult sometimes. I have, did you see the show True Detective when it came out on HBO, the one with Matthew McConaughey and all the business?
Yes, I did.
I loved the first series. I thought it was one of the best bits of television I'd ever seen. And I actually got some ideas of how to do some of the work by watching that show. There's some really good, like, investigative processes that they showed, especially when McConaughey was in the storage building with the long hair and the beard and smoking cigarettes, and he kind of obsessively put up this murder board on the walls like that. That kind of work actually it can inform how to do the work. I guess I'm saying, for people out there that are watching the webinar today, or that watch it at some point in the future, the things you see on TV may be a little bit outlandish as far as breaking and entering and strong arming people and those kind of things. That doesn't happen. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of the work that actually happens. And if you find it interesting, if you think of, the Jeffrey Dean Morgan character from The Good Wife, or if you think of, what's the young guy that did the, Ted Danson was in the show as a publisher, and it's just gone. Sorry.
No problem.
It's a recent PI show. There are a number of shows that make it look really exciting and interesting, and it is. It is an interesting job. It can be an exciting job. So, in the fact that I came to it through being a real estate appraiser, you went from flipping burgers to going to whose detective agency or academy?
It was Nick Harris Detective Academy.
Nick Harris Detective Academy. Yeah, and I just got a note from Kim. The show that I was talking about is Bored to Death. If you've not seen it, look at it. It's hilarious. It's over the top, PI cheesy, but there's some good stuff in there. It's not all wrong. Put it that way.
Okay. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Mark Lubell asks, he says, as a 60-year-old guy who's always wanted to be a PI, what's a good area of PI work to begin a career? Do you have any thoughts on that? Where would be a good part of the PI business to start?
So I remember coming up when I first was really trying to get into this industry. It seems like the workers' comp, surveillance, investigator mills, as I used to call them, are a good way to get your foot into the business. Now, unfortunately, some of these companies will take advantage of you. They will they'll put you out there and have you driving thousands and thousands and thousands of miles, and they won't pay you that much in order to do it. However, it is a good way. In California, you have to accumulate 2,000 hours a year for up to 6,000 hours for 3 years in order to be able to test to take your license. It is a good way to accumulate those hours in an effort to go ahead and be able to get your license. Here's some pro advice to you. Just make sure that you know your worth. Make sure that you don't get taken advantage of. And know that after doing a few months of that time, you will make yourself more marketable to another PI firm who will be looking for somebody that's a little more seasoned than a guy just walking off the street, and will give you the opportunity to earn your bones out there.
Yeah. And surveillance work is one of the areas of the PI profession that if you're a person looking for a little bit of excitement, surveillance work is a place to go, because
Absolutely.
you can find yourself in some absolutely insane situations doing surveillance. If you're doing, like here in Tennessee, a lot of the surveillance work is rural surveillance work where you're out in the sticks, and like you park a BMW on a country road, someone's going to notice that
Real quick.
And if I park in certain neighborhoods, I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. If you park in certain neighborhoods, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. And as private investigators, we have to figure out how to fit into a bunch of different areas if you're going to do surveillance work. So, Mark, I would say surveillance work is one area that you could look at as a person who's 60 years old, getting into the business. I'm 50, I'll be 52 this year. I'm getting to the point in life where people just don't notice me. You know what I'm saying? It's like I walk into a room and people are, oh, there's that old guy, the guy with the gray beard and the gray hair. The older we get, the less people really pay attention to us a lot of times. So
I have noticed that.
So if you're 60 plus and you want to get into this business, PI surveillance work could be a way to get into it.
Another way I heard that people have been breaking in is doing stuff like the mystery shopper, going in there undercover type of deal and seeing what products and stuff are out there. And depending on what your skill set is, Mark, if you're a good communicator and you may want to try and see if your local public defender's office has a need for somebody out there. You can get into public defender investigations and not have to crawl in and out of a car in 100-degree weather and hide in the back seat to get started. It's just all depending on what your skill set is, sir.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say is, the criminal defense side, and I know that some people that tune into these webinars and that read Pursuit magazine and that talk to me on the phone on occasion say, dude, you got to quit talking about defense work all the time. It's what I do primarily, so it's what I talk about mostly. But if you're 55, 60, 65 years old and you've got some analytical skills, you have the ability to talk to people and ask some questions and record those answers and then put it into a report that you can deliver to an attorney, you can go to the public defender's office and see if they need any extra help. That's one route. You can also, in Tennessee, you can go to attorneys who work on the appointed list. And they can get you appointed on indigent cases to work as a private investigator. And if they do, it doesn't cost them anything. The administrative office of the courts pays for it. So it's some free help for an attorney who's working for peanuts, let's be honest, to defend the citizen accused. Those guys, if they're smart attorneys, they're going to want that kind of help. And they covet that kind of help. And if someone went to them and said, hey, I've gotten licensed, I'm a private investigator, I don't mind going to interview people, I don't mind putting together reports and notes and helping you get more information to make your case better, that's a great way to get into this business. What are some, Steve, tell me this, what are some industries that you can think of off the top of your head that would be really easy transitions from that industry to private investigations?
Right off the top of my head, journalists, I think that they, with their strong research skills and their ability to be able to write, I mean, it's one thing to come into this business with being personable and being able to engage people in conversation. Like you had mentioned earlier, it's another thing to be able to write a clear and concise report that can be used in court. And I think a journalist obviously would hopefully have those abilities. Policemen, of course, depending on, if you did patrol all your career, it's going to be a transition from being a patrol officer, of course, to doing the investigative aspects of it in some ways. But that's a good way, a good cross in between these two industries to get in. I've met people that did things such as, just I met a landscaper that was, a businessman that knew how to talk to people and just, had a face that people liked and found open, and he's done very well in this business. So I really think that it's not necessarily where you were career-wise. I think that a lot of it has to do with who you are and what you personally can bring to the table. You just have to assess yourself and see what skills you have. If you're a great writer, but you don't talk to folks, there is a niche in this business for that. You can be a great background investigator that doesn't necessarily have to interview people. If you like to talk and like to listen, there's definitely, you can be a great interviewer, AOE, COE guy, or criminal defense investigator. It's just really depending on what you have.
Yeah, and there are when people ask about the PI profession, they say, oh, well, what does a PI do? I mean, the first thing I have to say is that's such a broad answer that, I mean, private investigators do anything from surveillance to jury consulting, like, and anything in between. AOE, COE, what is that?
That's a rising out of employment and course of employment. It's workers' comp. And it's, the folks that are out there just talking to people about their claims to try to determine whether the claim is legitimate or not.
And when people say SIU investigations, what does that mean?
special investigations unit. They encompass a little bit of the AOE, COE, as well as going out and doing surveillance and going to scenes where the accident had taken place. They actually they started taking away a lot from the workers' comp mill investigators when a lot of these insurance companies started their own SIU units.
Right. So there's a lot of work to be had for private investigators in that surveillance realm.
Mhm.
And talking about industries that would make a really good transition to the PI work. Since Kim is a journalist, I've done a little bit of journalism work way back in the day, but we have a lot of friends that are journalists, and every one of those people would be a fantastic private investigator.
I believe.
The ability to go do public record searches and do FOIA requests and just compile all kinds of information to write a long form narrative piece of journalism. I'm thinking specifically of one writer that I know that works with ProPublica and the New York Times magazine. If she were to become a private investigator, she could do so much good as a private investigator. But the thing is, she does so much good on such a larger stage as a journalist that
Right.
she's right where she needs to be. But there are a lot of journalists out there right now that are finding themselves, out of work. I know several newspapers have just recently let people go from their staff. I know several public radio outlets have furloughed a bunch of people or just canceled shows. And there are journalists out there with a crazy strong skill set that could go into private investigations like that. So I'm speaking specifically to my public radio friends. If you want to be a private investigator, now might not be a bad time to get into it.
Absolutely. And the industry needs, we need strong investigators out there, especially to help spearhead this image of professionalism that we want to put out there.
Yeah, and we've got another question from Mass Beat. This is from the YouTube channel. What is a typical caseload for an individual private investigator? And they say, I'm sure the answer is different depending on the niche industry, but is there an average that one might take at a single time? What does your typical caseload look like?
So I work for a lot of attorneys. So like for instance, I can explain it. Let me put last week into context.
Okay.
Okay. So on any given day, I can go out and locate some witnesses, serve papers on them, call a witness up to take a statement, then go out and do 5 hours of surveillance on somebody, for whatever erroneous reason, and then go and do 10 background investigations. That for me is basically a typical week. Is locating witnesses, talking to them, doing background investigations on witnesses, potential witnesses, doing surveillance on folks, and going out and serving papers. For me, that's my normal caseload. Thrown in every once in a while with I work with a guy that does some bug sweeps and things like that. So every once in a while, just if I want to mix it up a little bit, I'll go with them on some of those things. But that's my typical caseload. How about yourself?
My caseload is I routinely have, well, let's look at my last week. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cases that are open and in various stages of the process in Texas. I've got 7 cases here in Tennessee that are at various stages of the process. So what's that, a total of about 15, 16, 17 cases that are active. And I don't work on all of them all of the time.
Right.
One day I might focus on one specific case. Next day I might do 2 hours on one, 2 hours on the next, 2 hours on the next. Just kind of depending on what needs to be done. But the thing about the work of a private investigator that I think is really fun, if you're self-motivated and don't need someone to tell you exactly what to do every bit of the day. You can get up at 4:30 in the morning and do some research, and then meet your friends at the gym at 7 and take a couple hours off and do whatever. And then you can hit the streets to do interviews, at 10, 11, 12, 1, and then take a break, maybe take a nap, and then go do some more research. And then if you really want to work yourself hard, you go do some surveillance that evening until midnight or so, and then you go back home. But I mean, the days can look different. One of the things I think is funny is, we talk about this business as being exciting and entertaining and, full of adventure. I was on the phone with our pal Brian Willingham earlier this week, and we were talking about the actual work of a private investigator. And I said, a lot of the work we do isn't actually that exciting.
No.
But the narratives that the work informs they're entertaining, they're interesting, whatever. But a lot of the work can be boring. I think certain types of personalities are drawn to this work, and I think you're probably the same way as I am on this. I mean, if somebody gives me a thread and says, here's an example, I've got a couple of investors want to buy a house, just like they just want to buy a house, but there's an issue with the title from 1972. And they need to find out if this one lady who had a 50% ownership in the property has any descendants. Well, I'm the kind of guy that's like, dude, I will dig into that. I'll lose myself in that research.
Right.
And I'll come up with like city directories from the town they lived in from 1950 and census records from 1930. And I love that stuff. It's so much fun, but it's not adventurous, exciting. You're not in car chases. You're not getting shot at.
Right.
Usually.
But no, not under normal circumstances. I have, and that type of work actually, is not the getting shot at, but the research and stuff is something that appeals to me. And I like talking to people. Though I have had surveillances where I've had somebody try to break into my car when I'm sitting in it. And I've you would be amazed and when you're out there on the streets, the type of folks that you do interact with. I remember I was in South LA. This is earlier on in my career, and I was doing doing surveillance, and a gentleman comes and knocks on my window. I'd been sitting out in front of their place for quite a while, and I roll the window down, and the guy is talking to me, and he has a artificial eye. And I kid you not, an ant was crawling across his artificial eye while he was talking to me. So I was having a hard time, of course, focusing on what he was trying to tell me. And at the same time, there's an ant that's crawling across his eye because he clearly couldn't feel it. So it was, like I said, there's just been there are some interesting things that can occur. Even though like surveillance by itself it's a mixture of boredom followed by, adrenaline rush when the person takes off and you got to fight through traffic and all of that, all of those challenges. But there are things sometimes that break the monotony, and that was one of the things that can break it for me.
I had a person one time. It was a criminal defense case. I was trying to find a witness, knocked on the door of this trailer in the middle of a mesquite run outside of Abilene, Texas, in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And this tow-headed little kid comes to the door, just as cute as she could be. And I said, I'm looking for so-and-so. She goes, she ain't here. Hang on a second. So she runs back into the house, shuts the door. Literally 3 seconds later, the door flings open and this guy racks one into his Winchester 20 gauge shotgun and points it right in my face. And it was like, it's the only time I've actually been scared, like terrified. And what made me think of this is you were talking about the glass eye. This guy had one like kind of cloudy blue eye that was looking off that direction.
Gotcha.
And then the other crystal clear blue eye was staring right at me. And it just, I will never forget that one lazy eye looking off in the distance and the other one following the barrel of that gun in my face. And I just put my hands up and said, I'm gone. I'm good. We're good. And walked back to the car. I got out of range of the shotgun. I said, "Do you know where she is?" And he said, "Go now." I said, "Fine, I'm gone." But yeah, and somebody pointed out just a second ago, Amy Ehrman says, no, not Amy, Aaron Price says, I think most people tend to age out of getting a rush from getting shot at. That gets old real quick.
It does. I haven't gotten shot at. I do. And again, this is earlier. It seems like all of these things happened to me earlier in my career. I guess maybe it's true. You do learn a little bit more as you grow older. It's similar. I was out in a place called Beaumont, California, and then I got there at like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had to do it. I always do a canvas, so you can know your area. And as I got back in the car, I'm in my car for like 10 minutes, and I noticed that there's some movement outside my car. And so I opened the door. I'm like, "Can I help you?" And there's a guy with a gun, you know, uh, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, yeah, I had already called in police department. Sometimes we call, sometimes we don't. But luckily, I called in on that case and called in what we call a code 5. And I said, "Hey, just call the police department." I said, "They'll explain to you what I'm doing here. And if you still have a problem afterwards, we can talk about it." So later on, the guy came back and he said, "I apologize." He said that there's been somebody that's been crawling in through people's windows and basically snatching kids and trying to take them, and also been doing rapes and stuff. He was like, "In this area." I said, "Well, I can certainly understand your trepidations, about folks coming through." Um, and thank God I had called, the code 5 on that. But yeah, I mean, I don't like to get shot at. I don't like guns to be pulled out on me. I'm not Rockford like that. I don't like those things. But there are things, of course, unfortunately, that do happen in that arena when you're out there.
Well, the thing about it is that's one of the things that keeps the work a little bit on the interesting side. When you're doing surveillance work, somebody's going to be pissed off at you. You're not doing it
Absolutely.
because everybody's behaving. I
Absolutely.
want to get to the crowd real quick. Amy Ehrman said she's a private investigator and a forensic genealogist. I love old records. We were talking about different industries that would make for really good private investigators.
Hmm.
I was a member for a long time of the Society Independent Information Specialists Association.
Okay.
And independent information specialists, most of those information specialists are librarians,
Okay.
and they make for fantastic private investigators, especially if you're doing due diligence or research work or genealogy.
Hmm.
They're fantastic at that kind of
I
work.
definitely could see that. I
Yeah,
definitely could see librarian going out there and killing it, especially with the research aspect of it.
yeah. So there are a number of industries and skill sets that would translate to private investigation. So I'm going to encourage the people that are in the room. If you have an interest in this business, it, it can be fun work, it can be meaningful work, and it's not terribly difficult to get into. So if you're trying to figure out something to do, and you're interested in this work, call somebody in your local area who's a private investigator. Talk to them. A lot of the private investigators I know are happy to sit and talk with someone for a little bit of time and share some mentoring time with them. Um, and if they aren't, then they're not people you want to work with anyway.
And if you find, I mean, feel free to give me a call. I would love to talk to anybody that's seriously interested in pursuing this work. I can even suggest a couple of books. There was one by Greg Fallis, Be Your Own Detective. I found that one to be entertaining, and it had some seeds of wisdom in there. Another one is The Idiot's Guide to Private Investigation by Stephen Carey Brown. May he rest in peace. He offered a lot of great insight and some golden nuggets as well as far as the business goes, that I feel where it was is extremely applicable and helpful.
Yeah, and as far as books go, there are a number of resources for people that are interested in the business. And there's a PI for Dummies. There's the Idiot's Guide. There's if you go on Amazon and just do PI training, you'll find a number of books you can buy. PI education the company that we have has several courses that we primarily focus on continuing education. So if you've got a license and you need to have CE to maintain that license, that's where we focus our efforts. But a lot of the courses we have would be really good for someone that's just interested in the business. We've got a surveillance course that is really useful and entertaining, has some good information in it. We've got some due diligence courses, some research courses, communications courses. There are resources that you can avail yourself of if you're interested in the business. And one of them is the free webinars we do once a month. I mean, we've been here every month for the past several months, and I'm 18, 19 months in a row doing one a month, and they're free. There's always a super talented, super smart, super engaging guest on, much like yourself, Steve,
Well, thank you.
to
I
share their
appreciate that.
insight and their wisdom. And it's free. It's available to the public. It's a way that people, in the industry can learn a little bit on the fly. It doesn't cost anything. You don't get anything other than a little bit of edification, hopefully, and some time with your peers. And I do notice sometimes that the chat function on the YouTube channel gets pretty entertaining along the way. Let me
I'm
ask you
sure.
this. Let me ask you this, Steve. Talk to me about some of the most fulfilling cases you've worked over the years. What are cases that mean the most to you?
Um, Two in particular, three actually come to mind. The first one being, my wife was when I met her, we didn't. She was adopted. We didn't know anything in regards to where she had came from, and she didn't want to approach the subject at the time with her parents because she didn't want them to think that she wasn't appreciative of them. So we have went and through the filing and everything to get information from the state. Um, we ended up getting some newspaper clippings and stuff that basically said in a letter saying that she was abandoned and left in a dumpster. And this was back in the 80s prior to DNA and all of these things that we fortunately have in our toolkits now. So there was a big search that was put out, of course, for her parents at the time, but there was just all the leads led to nowhere. So it took quite a few years, but we went through bouts of taking stuff out of the trash can that she was throwing away because she was getting frustrated with the search, and it took a lot of one of her relatives gave us some good leads that led to a different set of family members, to eventually us through DNA and through asking a lot of good questions and finding her biological family. Her mom, her biological mother, had passed away by the time we had found her. But she was able to speak with her biological father, who had given her some information. She found siblings that she didn't know she had, who now she still is able to keep in touch with them. And to see the impact that is made, not just on her life, but also my kids' lives, it's been awesome and amazing.
I was going to ask about that. Like, that's a very personal investigation. Like
Hmm.
it's the most conflict of interest investigation there is.
Yes,
But
sir.
I was going to ask, obviously there are serious implications for your wife um, that you have to kind of cautiously approach. But your children, what has the impact been on them? How has it impacted them?
Um, for them, it's been good because now that piece of the puzzle of who am I has it's been fit in now. So, and they've been able to explore having relationships with these folks and share stories of their lineage that they didn't know prior, and it's been beautiful because they still they love all sides of their family, and to be able to have these experiences and these lessons and these beautiful blends of culture that they now have, it's been great for them to watch,
That's
great for me to watch them have rather.
that's fantastic. It's one of the most amazing stories I think we've ever had in Pursuit magazine. It's the Foundling series. It's from 2016. For those of you watching today, uh, go to pursuitmag.com and just Google Foundling, or you can look for Steve Morrow as author, either one. Find those stories, read them. It's a crazy, interesting case. And like I said, it's one of the most personal investigations I can think of. We've had a couple of people come to this business through a similar process. Rochelle Davis over in Missouri came to the process after doing some adoption searches in her own family, and she now specializes in adoption searches and genealogical research, which is fascinating. The worst ever surveillance burn you've experienced?
Okay. So I was in Oakland, and it was a workers' comp case, and I got there early. As always, we always get there early. And this was at a medical facility because we didn't know where the guy lived. And it was simply ID the guy, follow him home, so that way we can pick it up and do more surveillance. I get there early, and there's a gentleman in the elevator with me. And me being nice, I'm talking to this guy, and he's really friendly. And we happen to walk to the same door at the medical facility. So eventually they let us in, and I'm still talking to this guy. He goes and fills his name out, and I go up to listen. I'm like, oh crap, this is the person that I'm supposed to be watching. So I try to make myself invisible at that point. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna go away. I'm gonna go sit in the car. I know what he looks like, and I had happened to see what car he had driven up in. So I'm like, let me position myself. So his medical appointment was hours, which tends to happen. And he gets out and he goes to his car, and I'm following him. We get to almost San Jose, and I notice that there's two cars that are aggressively pulling up behind me. And so I make a left, and they make a left. And then I make a right, and they make a right. So I'm like, okay, so these people are definitely on me. And then the guy that I had went up to watch kind of almost T-bones me in the road. And so I U-turn, and this is back when we just had the Tom, and I'm like, police station, So I go to the police station, they peel off. That was one of the worst burns that I've ever gotten.
Wow, that's insane. I had I set up in a I think it was a Chick-fil-A or something like that, maybe Kentucky Fried Chicken, or an Arby's. It was Arby's, and my subject had gone into a hotel, 2 lots down, but I had a good view of the front door of the hotel. So I'm sitting in this Arby's. I've got my video camera. I'm so far away. I've got my camera set up on the table, just pointing through the window at the hotel, and I went ahead and ordered some food. I'm like, this is a great surveillance spot. And then about 20 minutes into my sitting there, about 15 Metro police cars roll up. And I didn't notice that there was a Bank of America between me and the hotel. So they thought I was casing the Bank of America to do some dirty work, I guess.
Well, hopefully it was the bank that called and not the subject, right? That's how we have to look at optimistically as investigators.
It was somebody from the fast food place had called thinking, oh, this guy's stalking out the bank. But yeah, that was kind of funny. I've had people bust me on surveillance before, and it's just, it just happens. I mean, I've never met an investigator in my life that hadn't been burned at some point. And if you do meet one that says they've never been burned, you've just met an investigator that lied to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more surveillances you do, it's just hard. It's the odds are you're going to get caught by one. Or I remember I worked a case where it was a surveillance investigator mill, as we call them, and they neglected to tell me that the previous 2 other investigators had gotten burned. So I set up in the same exact places, thinking this is an excellent surveillance spot, and the guy comes out and bangs on my window and says, "I know you're in there. I know you're watching me."
Wow. Yeah.
So what do you do?
I had an investigator one time, he asked me, he said, what do I do if there's a confrontation? And I said, what do you mean? What do you do if there's a confrontation? He said, well, I carry my handgun with me at all times. I said, do not pull out your handgun in a confrontation while you're on surveillance under my,
Yep.
please don't do that.
Yeah.
We got a note from the crowd. We got Michael Horner, and I think Michael is out of Texas. I'm thinking Houston, Texas, but I'm not sure. He says, I truly believe we shouldn't be so secretive about the industry. I'll talk to anyone about the profession to the point they need to tell me to shut up. I think it's a really important point to bring up. We're getting down to the last couple of minutes of our hour together. Steve, thank you for joining us and being willing to talk openly about the business.
Thank you.
There are a lot of private investigators that like hold things really close to the vest and don't want anyone to know who they're real secretive about everything. Or they say, I'm not going to share my resources with you and tell you where I get my information because I've worked to get this. Like, I think we lose so much in doing that. It's much more useful to me to share information with people than it is to try and hide stuff from people. So I think you feel the same way.
Absolutely.
And are you familiar with Michael Horner?
Yeah, actually, hi, Mike. Yeah, I know Mike. I know him very well.
He's one of my favorites on Facebook in the PI community because he just puts it out there, and he says what he thinks, he does what he does. But he did a live thing on YouTube, on Facebook either yesterday or the day before that was just really fascinating about the actual work of a private investigator. So people that share information like that, I think, are really good for the industry. Brian Willingham, one of the best in the country, routinely shares information freely on his website and in these webinars and through his blog. So anytime you get a chance to share information with someone that wants to be in the business or that's trying to better themselves in the business, I recommend you do. It doesn't hurt you one bit. I do want to take I got two more things. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, absolutely not. I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, we should help the next whoever wants to get in, try to get in and be the best they can be.
Yeah, and let's be honest. I'm 52 this year, and I don't want to be 70 years old doing this work.
God willing, right? Or at least if you are, just answering the phone, so telling somebody else how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple things before we get off the line. Number one, we do have a discount code. This is good until the end of the month, which is just next week. If you use the discount code SUMMERCE, Summer CE as in continuing education, that'll get you 10% off of any class you want to take here at PI Education. Steve Morrow, thank you so much for joining us today. I literally can't thank you enough. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I expect that you and I will do this many more times, if not live on the webinar. I'm going to bug you over the next couple of years.
Likewise, I look forward to being bugged, and thank you. It was a pleasure to see both you and Kim, face to face like this. So I appreciate you guys and everything you've done for the industry. So thank you.
Thank you. Steve, have a good weekend, and thank your wife for allowing us to talk about her story a little bit. And for all the folks out there in the crowd, thank you for being here. We really appreciate you. Have a great weekend. Everybody stay safe, and please wear your masks. All right. Cheers.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.